In the military, I told you we bring in over 100,000 new leaders every year. And what we're looking for is someone who has the ability to earn trust, somebody who's adaptable in what they do, and who has a growth mindset. And so as you bring those people in, you have to create the right culture for them to have the freedom to fail, the freedom to be successful in what they do. One of the things the military does is we rotate people around on a regular basis. So you immediately go into your first job, 12 to 18 to 24 months later, you're going to be going into a new job. So as you go into the new job, what do you do over the first 100 days? What you do is you try to build trust. I always tell people who are on my team, I'm going to ask you to loan me your trust initially until I have the opportunity to earn it. So it's very important in the first 100 days that you create those conditions of trust, that people may not like what you tell them, but they understand that you have their best interest in mind. So as you go into an uncertain circumstance, the trust investment that you've made is paramount to be able to move forward. Using an example of drawing the Army down, we made a deliberate decision to have frequent and honest communication across the Army to let people know what to expect. They didn't always like the answers, they didn't always like the outcomes, but they always knew that they had the truth as much as we knew, as frequent as we knew. And when things changed, and things do change, or mistakes were made, and there were a couple of mistakes that were made, we had the opportunity to have trust, and using their first line leaders across the force to have conversations with them and let them know that what we were doing was the best thing that we could do, even though it wasn't necessarily aligned with their outcome. And so when you go into an uncertain circumstances, having that basis of trust, having that understanding of the need to be adaptable, and for people to go beyond where they thought they would go in terms of growth mindset are key. But explain to them the why, I found more often than not, is the way to get through whatever complex situation you're in. There's a leader I had the opportunity to work for in the Army, and he's in the McChrysler group as well, and he would tell us that every conversation has two parts. One, where you have a moral and ethical obligation to state your opinion, to justify your opinion, and to arguably forcibly for your opinion. And then decisions made in part two of the discussion, everybody rose together. And I think that's really important to have that kind of relationship with your team and your organization. It's also been said that the most dangerous leader is someone who's incredibly competent but lacks character. And so in the military, we do a lot of different assessments to try and discern the difference between the two, and ideally get in leadership positions those people who have both the character and a lot of things we're talking about, the emotional intelligence, the courage to listen, the courage to act, the courage to explain, as well as the competence. Because oftentimes if you have someone who is incredibly competent but lacks a character, we as humans tend to overlook it and say, but look at their results, look at their sales, look at the things they've generated without understanding the collateral damage of their actions. I've found over the years that the higher up somebody goes in an organization, the more that organization takes on that person's personality. So if you have a great, enjoyable personality, people will take it. If you're very serious, you never laugh. If you don't underwrite honest mistakes, the organization kind of takes that personality along with it. So it kind of goes back to trust. It goes, being the leader who will lead the way that you need them to lead. I was one time asked to put my leadership philosophy in a bumper sticker, and I simply said, I want to be the leader I want to work for. And that doesn't mean always saying yes. It doesn't mean always saying good job. It means holding me accountable, making me a better person, and making me a team leader, so I can, basically my legacy would be those who came behind me, that they would all be hugely successful. And I would take the time and the opportunity to invest in them like so many people invested in me.
As you mentioned investing in people, it reminds me of what every leader does. Every leader engages people on a one-on-one basis. When I was a commander at SEAL Team 4, the one thing I looked at was for my officers in chief, so the structural leaders inside my organization, there were all kinds of people who might train them to do certain things, but the one thing that I and only I would do or could do or wanted to do was to shape their judgment. And what I find is down in an organization, with leadership, the easy decisions are yes and no. Usually people will get those right. The really hard decisions are could and should. And now when you put that into an organization from top to bottom and you talk about strategic risk, operational risk, and then the day-to-day risk that they deal with on their own, What's really important is that the day-to-day risk that they're dealing with, that they have the mindset of strategic risk, so they're not creating problems in other places in the organization, so that the organization can live with the decisions they make at the tacticals. That's a key piece of empowerment. And then, but in addition, if you have everybody nested underneath like that, then what you get is symmetry across the functions. And I don't want to give the impression that you can program everything, because leadership does matter, and not all leaders are created equal. But that's why, and it's so important to put these processes and programs together, is because great leaders will lead great, and those who need to develop themselves as a leader will need the structure in order to do that. They will need the guidance, and they'll need the tools, and they'll need to be equipped so that one day they can lead at the position that you're at now.
I think so much of that goes into empowered leadership to make sure they know that they have the trust in you and they can operate. I had a job at one point where my boss was now co-located with me, and I had gone to visit him, and his assistant knocked on the door and said, "Sir, you have a phone call." And I offered to step out of the room so he could take the phone call. She said, "No, it's not for him, it's for you." I go, "Somebody's calling me. Everybody knows I'm in with the boss." And she said, "No, it's your home office." So I went and picked up the phone, and they shared that we had lost an employee. So they walked me through what had happened. It had been expected. There was she had had a long illness, a sad story. And they said, "We'd like to send something out to the workforce to let them know." I said, "Absolutely." They said, "We'd like to read it to you." And so they read it to me, and they said, "Will you approve that?" I said, "Approve it?" I said, "Is there anything in there that's not factual?" "No." "Is there anything that would violate that person's privacy?" "No." I said, "Well, why do I need to approve it?" They said, "Well, your predecessor would not let anything leave unless they had personally approved it." I said, "You got to understand, I trust you, and 95% of the time we're going to get this right. 5% we don't get it right. We're going to sit down, do an after-action review, figure out what went wrong, and we'll get it right the next time. But the fact of the matter is, if your batting average is a 950, I'm comfortable with you swinging at whatever you want to. And if you make a mistake, we'll underwrite that mistake and learn from it."
A common theme in everything we're talking about, it comes back to trust. And what we've done through the course of the conversation is reveal that there's also programs that support this, that there is a plan, but within that plan you have the autonomy to lead as you see fit, to build trust as needed within that system. I was once at a leadership offsite while I was still in the military, and they asked the question, "What is taking care of your people?" And there's probably 35 people in that classroom, and one of my peers wrote down something, and I have carried it forward. What he said makes so much sense. And what this person said was that how you take care of people is the continuum between accountability and development. And that's one thing that I see people struggle with, is they want to build trust, but there are certain places where you need to hold people accountable. How you hold them accountable matters. How you hold them accountable matters. There are certain places where people can make a mistake, and it has to be, and it can be forgiven and learned from, right? There's no wins or losses, there's just learnings. The real hard thing as a leader, I think, is the paradox that exists between the two, between accountability and development. And now, in every business, there are certain places, whether it be legal, whether it be ethics, whether it be, having to do with guiding principles or values, there are certain places where mistakes can't be tolerated, and for those there's accountability. And then there are places where somebody has the right intent, it was ethical, it was legal, all of those, they just made a bad choice, and from those there can be development. But how a leader works within that spectrum is really important, not only to the individuals that are working together, the leader and the follower, but also to the enterprise. Because the residual effect of how one person is affected, that does affect culture. So I think it's really important to kind of shape these things within a leadership team, to have these conversations where people understand it's not yes, no, it's judgment. It's the difference between could, should. It's the paradox between what can be done and what ought be done. And I think to align as a management team is really important, because if you can align and carry yourself forward in a similar way with symmetry across the organization, it absolutely affects engagement, which absolutely will affect retention. And these lessons that we're talking about, as I go around inside industry, these are the types of things that I feel like organizations struggle with. Is how do we set the climate for individual engagement, but maintain symmetry across the different functions and lines of business inside the enterprise?
Absolutely. And I found over the years that a leader's lowest standard oftentimes becomes the team's highest standard. Mm-hmm. In other words, what they do as they lead by example or don't lead by example will send a message, and it goes to the accountability piece, that if you don't hold somebody accountable when they make mistakes, and accountable doesn't mean necessarily firing, it means coaching, teaching, mentoring, and showing them how a different way to do it, then what happens is everybody, not only that person, everybody on your team is looking to see if there's a consequence or a development opportunity for that person. So if you, as a leader, show up late for work every day, take 2-hour lunches, treat your team differently than you treat yourself, then that's a message that erodes the trust and doesn't give you the ability and the moral authority to hold people accountable when they fall short on their own issues.